Slowly, the question of psychoanalysis in India became important, and that is when I encountered not just Professor Sudhir Kakar or Professor Ashish Nandi, but also Bose. So that is when I read Bose, saw Bose, and saw Bose in conversation with Freud, the exchange of letters between Bose and Freud, and the difference Bose had with Freud. So how Bose revisited psychoanalysis when it comes to India, and he rewrites psychoanalysis. Maybe if I can put it this way, writes a new script of psychoanalysis in a certain way. Not altogether new, nothing is altogether new, but somehow tries to rethink the contours of psychoanalysis. My days in 14 Parsibagan Lane, which you will visit in Calcutta, and that entry into that building where Bose lived and the library there, Bose's writings have been, I would say, life-changing for me. Really, they have made me think some of the very basic tenets of psychoanalysis. Bose wrote to Freud, and Freud reads his work, his reflections on Oedipus in India, etc., etc. And Freud says, well, yes, I agree with you that Indian patients don't suffer from castration anxiety the way European patients suffer. And I think this was a very, very interesting move by Freud, the way he responded to Bose. That yes, Indian patients are a little different from European patients. So your practice over there will be a little different from the way we practice over here, but the theory holds. So Freud, what he did, very interestingly, was to make it a case of psychoanalysis of Indians. But Bose was not telling him anything empirical, anything peculiar to Indians. Indian patients had only offered him a perspective to rethink, just like Dora, just like the analysans called hysteric in early Freud, 1895, give Freud a perspective. Just like Schreber gives Freud a perspective, just like Wolfman gives Freud a perspective, Bose's patients also give Bose a perspective. And Freud arrives at psychoanalysis through his patients. It's not that he had anything worked out called psychoanalysis before he met Dora, before he met Wolfman, before he met Schreber. So his psychoanalysis is born out of his patients, out of his case histories. Because Freud is a doctor. It is his patients who take him to something new, a new discovery. Okay. And Freud is amazing, brilliant to respond to that. But Bose's patients also can take him to a theorization. So while Freud tries to render it a particularity, a peculiarity of the Indian patient, that, well, you don't have the complex that way, you have it in a way a little different. Yeah, they don't have castration anxiety in exactly the same way, they have it a little differently. Bose is arguing that, my dear, this is not about Indian patients. It is about an Indian, and I'm saying Indian with some hesitation over here because it's not Indian like that, but to play on that, it's an Indian understanding of psychoanalysis. Just like you can have a German understanding of sociology, or a French understanding of psychoanalysis, Jacques Lacan. Okay. So, or a British understanding of psychoanalysis. You can have an Indian understanding of psychoanalysis. So it's not about, it's a beautiful exchange of letters over there. Freud repeatedly pulling Bose to say, it's about Indian patients. And Bose repeatedly saying, no, my dear, it's not about Indian patients. It's about an Indian understanding of the tenets of psychoanalysis. So in that sense, the very naming of Bose's book, which is his PhD, the concept of repression, is very important to me, because he was not arguing whether there is repression or there is no repression, but the importance of the concept of repression in psychoanalysis, and hence, if it's a concept, the possibility of other concepts as foundational or as equally important. And one concept, at least, Bose foregrounds, is the concept of ambivalence. See, we had taken repression as given, that we are all repressed. Bose takes repression as a concept, that psychoanalysis is driven by a concept called repression, rather than the reality of repression. So while in usual Freudian psychoanalysis we had thought, oh, we are repressed, okay, Bose poses a fundamental question to that you are seeing the psyche and the subject through actually the concept of repression. And would this be the only concept through which we would understand the psyche? And Bose had a very interesting angle to that, which Freud saw. And Freud said in one of his letters that yes, we need to work on this. The concept of ambivalence as put beside the concept of repression. And both are concepts, they are not things. While Freud tries to understand it through the concept of repression, Bose tries to understand it through the concept of ambivalence. Bose sees the infant child as being placed in an ambivalent relationship with father and mother. But not just that, in an ambivalent relationship between eros and aggression, and in an ambivalent relationship between father and mother in terms of the fact of the understanding Bose propounds that they are not simply father and mother, male and female, masculine and feminine, that there is a fundamental ambivalence in their very gender enunciations.
Been influenced by Indian thinkers? I can't think of any. In fact, what Freud said to an Indian linguist from Calcutta, Suniti Kumar Chatterjee, in 1935, when he met Freud in his house at Burgas in 19, Freud, his remarks to Suniti Kumar Chatterjee in 1935 would explain how different Freud thought, how different Freud's thinking was from the thinking of the Indian spiritualists, or for how different psychoanalysis was from Indian spiritualism. This is an excerpt from their dialogue. I quote from Chatterjee's account. Chatterjee said, "What relationship has man's life with the ultimate reality, with that permanent object?" Freud began to laugh at my words. He said, "You see, from all that I have thought over this matter, I have found no connection between man's life and some permanent or abiding thing about which you speak. Here on this earth, with death, everything pertaining to man comes to an end." I said, "So with death, does everything which goes to make man come to an end as well? Is there then no ultimate reality? Do you not get any hints of such a reality even from art?" Freud replies, "No. Everything ends here. Art, beauty, joy, all these center around the body. And this is my considered conclusion: nothing exists after death." Chatterjee says, "Well, sir, there are people who are definite in their assertion that they have found in their lives some supreme reality, some eternal truth. The sages of the Upanishads and saints like Ramakrishna Paramahansa have declared, 'I have known this great being in luster like the sun, beyond all darkness.' They have declared in unequivocal terms, 'I have seen, I have known,' meaning I have seen the ultimate reality, I have known the ultimate reality." Excuse me. There is such a note of sincerity in what they say that one feels forced to have faith in them. What do you say to these? Freud says, "All this is unreal. All this is self-deception of persons who are emotional and who have only imagination and nothing else. That is to say, if you freely imagine, only then you can think of a connection with God in reality," and so on and so forth. If you care to think over this a little, you would understand that these things are not at all to be taken on trust, quote unquote. So Suniti Kumar Chatterjee says that there are Indian saints who say that they have had an encounter with this great being. Freud says you cannot take these things on trust, and he says all this is unreal, quote unquote. Now, one problem I see is that whereas the biggest problem, I think, is that Indian philosophers talk about the unconscious in some form, and Freud talks about the unconscious as well, and therefore it might give us the impression that they are talking about the same thing, but they are not. One problem is that whereas the Indian idea of the unconscious is of a divinely ordained, somewhat transcendental space, God oriented or God determined, like in the biblical book of the Daniel, where Daniel is an interpreter of dreams, and please come. And dreams are supposed to be, God's messages sent to man. So the unconscious is thought of as a space that is kind of regulated by God and divine principles. But the Freudian unconscious is a sexed entity. It is not only marked by repressed, incestuous impulses, but also marked by a pathological compulsion to repeat. My question simply is, would any Indian philosopher accept the Freudian figuration of the unconscious as an authentic description of the notion of the unconscious given in Indian philosophy? Would Indian philosophers agree that their idea of the unconscious is a sexed, incestuous, death instinct driven, symptom ridden entity? You should put this question to the Indian philosophers, not to the Indian psychoanalysts.
There's a third dimension which also human beings live in, which is the cosmic dimension. And cosmic has two aspects: the material, which is the whole Umwelt, birds, trees, animals, the whole Umwelt, and a much more a subtle one, which one calls the spirit, Geist, which has been in various cultures has been looked upon as different things, from spirits, demons, ghosts to God, universal spirit, all that part of it. And how does that enter into psychoanalysis? One of, little jokingly was that if psychoanalysis had not originated in Middle Europe with its cold climate where only two people have to sit in a room, closed room, and if it had taken place, started in India where it's a warm climate and where such kind of encounters take place under a tree, under a sea, you would have much more of the environment, of the cosmic, at least material dimension coming into psychoanalysis. There are two main parts of psychoanalysis. There have been a lot of changes in the theories, but there are two parts which have remained constant. One is, how does a patient speak, the free association, and how does a psychoanalyst listen, the gleichschwebende Aufmerksamkeit. And if you look at both of them, they are not taught at all in all the training, because actually the psychoanalysts don't really know how it happens. Whether one can look at that, which also I think Freud started, of the analyst listening, the Gleichschwebende, it has very much a meditative aspect. Also the completely free speaking, whatever comes to your mind, also has a meditative aspect. So one of the questions being raised was, is there a possibility of including some kind of meditative parts into psychoanalytic training if it is proved that you can your empathy does increase if you get a meditation. So it was a kind of asking those questions, but also saying that one has also to change the psychoanalytic view of from going away from its medical, that it's not a medical one, that it is much more what it increases is self-knowledge, increase in wisdom, and very, very much more also the empathy. And if that is so, then the most important thing is, as I said, the spiritual part. The spiritual not in a very kind of a high-flowing way, but that the spiritual actually is a continuum, and that if you look at it as a mountain climb, then the first base camp, tolerance, and the second is Mitgefühl, compassion, the third is empathy, and that summit which only the mystics reach, the union mystica, that one should leave out. But to increasing of all those three would be then part of what psychoanalysis aims to achieve, and not only it's for a long time this autonomous individuality, which means at the end the autonomous individuality is just a stepping stone to the caring individual. So autonomous and then the caring individual. That would be then how psychoanalysis would or could go. The view of the unconscious, which is not mine but which I espouse, is somewhat different from the Freudian view, or Freud's view, let's put it, because there have been other analysts who have gone away from it a little. Now, Freud's view of the unconscious id actually was expressed in his metaphor about the horses, that there's horses, wild horses, and the ego is the one which needs to control them. So otherwise it is dangerous and wild. So that there is some kind of dangerous part to the unconscious. I would really look at the unconscious much more as an elephant, which is much, much stronger than a horse. So actually it will go where it will, and our conscious part is the mahut on top of it, and it can only nudge it into the directions it wants to go, and it should never get into a fight with the elephant. And for that nudging, you need to know the anatomy and the physiology of the elephant. So you need to know your unconscious very well. But it is not it is actually a very friendly part of it. It gives you much more, it is much more friendlier than a dangerous part, and helps. So in fact, but that I think Freud also said at one time, I mean, for the most important decisions of your life, which profession to go into, who to marry, partner, don't think at all. Leave it to your stomach, as would be, or leave it to your unconscious. The smaller parts, you can do your rational parts of it. So the view of the unconscious is that yes, there are danger parts. When the elephant gets mussed, then you can't control it in any case. So forget about that. But otherwise, it is a friendly. It's a healing part also, and it's a creative part of human being. So creativity heals actually. What heals in psychoanalysis is I think not the understanding of part of it. That's a small one of understanding of your problem, but the release of creative imagination in the part. That is what a good psychoanalysis does, and that is also what makes the healing in psychoanalytic happen. The libido of Krishna, and Krishna's 16,000 wives without having an orgasm. That is a tantric belief of sexuality. The tantric belief of sexuality is very much that it is your sexuality which leads to enlightenment, in the sense of and the saving of the sexual fluid. So there's a whole idea that the sexual fluids which are in your genitals, etc., can be taken up. That is the whole chakras part of it, taken up to the top of the head, and that is where the mystical enlightenment happens as they go up. So how not to have the sexual emission, but have the sexual excitement, because the sexuality is what makes the greatest turbulence in your body-mind system. And you need that turbulence in the body-mind system to have new kind of ways of enlightenment or changing. Because normally we are all completely conditioned to be as we are, and you are not going to access those parts of your psyche without that great turbulence, and sexuality, they think, is the one which makes for the greatest turbulence in the system. So how to use that for enlightenment? That is the tantric system. Freud doesn't go that it gives you any kind of a mystical enlightenment. He says it makes you creative. So Freud himself stopped having sex at the age of 34. So he didn't also have sex. And he wrote also that in case of scholars, etc., the abstaining from sexuality, abstinence, helps the scholar to concentrate, etc., the subliminal. He didn't think in case of an artist, he thought artists needed that for there, so he made that difference. But it's in a certain way that sublimation of sexuality into creativity of scholars, writers. I think he thought so for himself too, but not the Indian philosophical, the tantric way of that, not only creativity, but that it leads to a kind of a mystical union or mystical experiences.
So sexuality in India and the dichotomy that exists, where on the streets, outside, definitely it's apparent, the repression. Also probably the conservatism aspects of that within the culture, and then a very liberated form of it as well. So I don't know how many answers I would have and how many questions in my response. And I'm not going to structure it. I'm just going to. So of late, we've been struggling. I think it's been there as an individual phenomena, the aspect of rape. But as a collective, there was an incident that had happened in Delhi. This was a few years ago. It was the whole act was very, very violating. It was more than rape. It was very violent. It was. It's almost like the female body has been attacked in a way that it's just ripped apart, just finished. So with this, there was a lot even that the media has been, a lot more that the media has been covering on rape, and one constantly thinks that there is severe deprivation and poverty and deprivation. Maybe it's true of all other cultures, but I can speak only of what I have experienced, heard, seen. Also poverty where everybody is sleeping in the same room. There is a sexuality between the parental couple in the same room. Even the violence has a very strong sexuality to it. The mother is being beaten up. It's a reality that we face through our household help, where a lady who is working for me will come and tell me that I was beaten up by my husband black and blue. And at some point in time she was able to say that that's because he wants to get intimate with me every night and he doesn't find my body desirable enough. And at some point he gets whipped into a frenzy where he wants to beat her up and calms himself down by beating her up. Maybe that's his orgasm. So I myself have been thinking that the incidence of rape can come down only when this kind of a severe divide which exists in India can be reduced between the privileged class and the underprivileged class. But that's one aspect. The other aspect is so there's a person who he got married very young. He got married to a woman who was much older, and it was a very, very conflicted marriage space. The woman was seemed always very drawn to her guru. This man was not able to, he thought it's a very sacred space for her. While he was wrought with anxiety about it, but he couldn't ask her that, okay, so what are you feeling? Do you get attracted towards your guru? That's not a question that's allowed. It troubled him a lot. He wanted to, the thing which would soothe him probably would be intimacy with his wife, but she wasn't very willing for intimacy. At some stage, as a form of bitterness and revenge, he started sleeping around with a lot of prostitutes. Now, this person has come to me, he's moved away from all that 15 years ago. And why I'm struggling is because I'm also trying to keep the confidentiality of the person intact as I share with you. So I'm trying to answer the question of sexuality while I don't need to divulge too many personal details. And yet tell the story, otherwise it doesn't reach. He went through many years of therapy. Then there was a gap in his life. then he got in touch with me. In the meantime, he began to turn to the tantric method. I really think from my two very up close and personal connect with two such lives, I think people maybe all over the world think that psychoanalysis and sexuality come together, and psychoanalysis is probably an answer to sexuality. For this person, the tantric method is an answer to sexuality. We are just beginning to explore it, so I cannot speak too much for him. There's a little bit, I'm trying to construct it as I speak. So for this person, where I feel there was initially, he was on the path of individuality. What I want, what I desire. He chased it for a long time. My sense is that there's a part of him which feels that individuality cannot answer it all, and he turned to Tantrism because, and this is, I haven't studied so much of, I don't know too much about the tantric method. I know it only by personal encounters, meeting people who've spoken about it. And for him, the tantric method is about worshipping. There are different words. So worshipping the feminine, worshipping various forms of various goddesses who take various forms, including the form of Shakti, and it's awakening Shakti. And he said, so there are a couple of places in India which practice it. There's a place in Visakhapatnam where there is a tantric priest who helps you through that entire ritual, and where it's about the ling and the yoni, where the yoni is supposed to represent the vagina. Now, when I was asking him, he goes to temples, and especially temples which are worshipping some mother goddess like a Kali, Durga, Adi Shakti. While Adi Shakti is Shiv and Kali together. But I'm picking up from his conversation, so maybe Adi Shakti is not, it can't be a goddess per se, so I'm not sure. But there are 9 or 11 such goddesses. Now he was saying that for him, when he will sit in a temple and he will sit and he will try and incorporate whichever the deity is, imagine and imagine and imagine so much that he and the deity can merge. And he said this is a tantric way of worship. It's also a tantric way of the individual. For him, he's beginning to feel that the man and the woman need to come together. So that is where psychoanalysis, tantrism, spirituality comes together.
way, and that's perhaps a little bit of the Dr. Freud, the medical Freud, the Freud of medicine, or the more scientific Freud, where sex would be seen, or let me put it this way, eros, which is a larger canvas, would be seen as sex, and sex would be seen as a goal, or an end, or a means to an end. So, or sometimes an end, not even a means to an end in itself, actually. So in that sense, it's possible that eros would get reduced to sex, sex would get reduced to goal, orgasm. So one way of understanding eros is this route, where you break eros down to parts, achievable parts. Orgasm is an achievable part of eros. The other is to see eros as not a particular or a particularized act, a kind of act that you have to perform. But eros as a kind of transcendence. Eros as a kind of relationship with the divine. And in that sense, it would be important to think psychoanalysis as not merely in the service of the expansion or the deepening of the sexual act, but an understanding of ourselves as having a fundamental relationship with our bodies, with drives, with desires, with eros as a larger framework, eros transcending from this kind of simple bodily particularity or the bodily act, eros going beyond that, and our relationship or our difficult relationship with eros. And that would give us an understanding of psychoanalysis, perhaps, which would not be about anymore the sexual act per se, but, and your question on sexuality gets related here, not sexual act per se, but the relationship, the subject that we are as sexed subjects, that we have a body and we have a being, we have an eros formed during our infant stage when we were touched naked for the first time by our caregiving others, and this self, this subject that I am, has to make sense of itself. So, and I see beyond the pleasure principle as not only taking us to the death drive, but beyond the pleasure principle as also making us see that either maximizing pleasure or the principle of pleasure, a principle of pleasure reduced to the sexual act, is not the only avenue psychoanalysis explores. It explores crazy avenues of eros, crazy bylanes of eros. Two kinds. One, Shreya, who is a man but feels like a woman, with a woman's body in a sexual divine union with God, but an erotic one nevertheless. other hand, Krishna, who is in a sexual relationship with thousands, but without that goal ever having reached orgasm. So in that sense, these mythopoetic moments give us the beyond of the pleasure principle, a pleasure principle that is not to be reduced to the sexual act or to sexual union or to certain paradigmatic goals of the sexual act, orgasm. So in that sense, they render sexuality uncanny, unheimlich, unfamiliar. They render sexuality, and psychoanalysis is an invitation to see sexuality, love, union as not simple, as not a simple two halves coming together and forming a whole. So the sexual relationship is always haunted by an impossibility. So Kishan's impossibility of orgasm is interesting for me because it's paradigmatic of the impossibility of the sexual relationship. Because you can have sex, you can do bang bang, you can have an orgasm, but where is the relationship? So the stress is on the relationship of the sexual relationship. So you can look at the word that very term, sexual relationship. You can stress the sexual and background relationship. You can stress relationship and background sexual. So it's a question of relative emphasis. And psychoanalysis is a theory of sexual relationship. But is it about the sexual relationship or is it about the relationship of the sexual? And in that sense, Kishan, Schreber all hint at the impossibility of the sexual relationship, the difficulty of the relationship, that we are haunted by the difficulty of relationship always. And that's a paradigmatic haunting. And our identities hence are not sex identities simply. Our identities are sex identities with an impossibility. That the relationships never get to work as well as I want. So that sexual, in that sense, satisfaction never comes. So one is never satisfied. As if the relationship, the sexual act is over, the orgasm is over, everything is over, but there's still something lacking, still something missing. In that sense, psychoanalysis renders us aware of the impossibility of the sexual relationship, rather than the simple possibility of the sexual relationship reduced to the goal, the orgasm, the act, the foreplay, the before play and the after play and all of that, reduced to a pure technology of sex. So psychoanalysis is a reminder of that fundamental, foundational impossibility in sexual relations. It's not so easy. It's not to be quickly arrived at. Something's elusive and not reduced to a more technological understanding or a technocratic understanding of the sexual. In that sense, both Krishna and Schreber are actually hinting at the impossibility of the sexual relationship and rendering us analytically aware of this fundamental impassive, block, hurdle in our lives. That pleasure never comes. And the more it eludes us, the more we search for it. So, psychoanalysis is always a philosophy to come. It never comes. It never comes fully. It's never reached. It's never achieved. So it is an impossibility rather than a simple utility maximizing possibility. Okay, oh, I got it. Psychoanalysis is about what we don't get, not about